Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for your engagement on the poll that I put up on the channel. This is a video based off of the results of that. I initially thought this was going to be an easy win for Molly. However, as it went on, there was one deciding vote that decided we should have an errata as the next video, just to make sure we're all shenaniganing correctly. So again, I want to put a big thank you out for all that engagement there. Let's talk about what we're gonna do. So I'm going to go through each of my videos and either give them a thumbs up or a thumbs down, and I will kind of condense or speed forward through those videos or just cut straight to those points where I noticed an error or something that needed to be corrected. And from that point, we'll just go ahead and slice and dice into each next video. So with that said, I've got the McMorning video running just to have something on the screen while we're talking about this, and I would like to dive into that. So the very first video I put out, the one that kind of spawned this whole channel coming out of my brain, McMorning to Unpack, the first thing I want to call out was a lack of showing or a visual like I have for the Whisper and Killer Instinct on McMorning and the Nurse. I didn't put one out there for the Kentaurai, who does have Grave Spirit's Touch. I even called this out in the video, and it's in the list in the video description, but it is so fairly minor in this unpack that I didn't really think to actually keep it on the screen. The notable thing about having Grave Spirit's Touch on a Kentaurai is that we will receive 2 instances of healing. So regen +2 happens from the upgrade at the time of activation, as well as Catalyst from Rafkin. Now, because these are simultaneous effects, we get to choose which one happens, and at the time of activation, we just tally up what is happening, and then we order them in whichever order we want. So in this case, for the Kentaurai, when we eventually get to that activation, it is a 1 instance of a +2 heal, and then a second instance of +1 heal off of the combination between Catalyst, the Kentaurai being poisoned, and the Perverse Metabolism ability on Kentaurai, where it heals instead of takes damage. So that's the first one. The second one was actually a pretty big miss, and I was doing a lot of mental shortcuts. Now, the arms, legs, head, and fat upgrades that McMorning 2 gives out, I did not mess up which markers give which upgrade. However, I did mess up that the head upgrade does not give +2 to simple duels. I was referencing that pretty heavily near the end when it was the Kentaurai's activation. I was talking about if I had received the vial from Rafkin through plastic surgery, that I would only need a 3 for it to go off. And I was also talking about a reduced TN for the Ride With Me. Luckily, none of this mattered based on what I flipped. However, the head upgrade requires a scheme marker, and it only gives you chatty, and it gives you +2 to willpower. So arms are going to require a scrap marker, and they will give you +1 defense. Legs will require a corpse marker, and they will give you +2 to movement. And then the scheme is going to be for the spare head, will give you +2 willpower. Fat is going to require a terrain marker, such as a sludge marker, for example. However, there's a lot of those types of markers in the game at the moment, so it shouldn't be too difficult. But if it doesn't happen, then you just will not get access to the excess fat upgrade, which is going to give you +2 to all simple duels. Now that was the big one that I missed here. For the most part, everything else in this unpack, as complicated as it was, it worked out pretty well, and all my poison tracking I went through and also checked, it did make sense. So that is all I really have to say about this one. All right, I'm gonna throw you right into Molly at this point, now that we are done with McMorning. This errata came up out of a recent discussion in the Discord, as usual, on how we could actually make the original Molly video even more intense. Now, when I recorded the Molly video at first, I gave myself a slight disclaimer saying, I'm gonna do my best, but here's how I think this works. And I was a little bit off, and that actually does matter for the future Molly video that is planned. and it has to do with the order of operations in which you pay, they discard a card, and how you resolve things. So buckle up, I'm going to try and help out with some visual aids on the screen as best I can to call out how this works. The main part of this adjustment that needs to be made is the difference between an ability, which is always on and always goes off as soon as it happens, and actions generated by effects, such as Memories of Blood on the Noxious Nephilim generating another action, which is take the last memory action. What would actually happen in the correct way of things is we finish in its entirety Molly's attack in addition to any triggers, which would be the deja vu trigger. So we would go Molly attacks, Molly declares deja vu and discards a card, Molly's fading procs, Philip copies Molly's fading. Then damage is flipped for the Noxious Nephilim. The Noxious Nephilim takes damage. Now that an effect generated a new action, the actions generated by effects rule kicks in. So you can see here on page 35 of the rulebook, I also brought the same snippet up in my Castor video for the Alpha Strike. The best way I can explain this or to really think about this is that if you have an obey, this is the most classic version of another model takes an action. If you have an obey that has a trigger on it, you first fully resolve the obey, which says, hey, go do something. And then you resolve the trigger on the obey before that model does something. So same exact thing is happening here. We hit the Noxious Nephilim, and the Nephilim is now saying, hey, Molly, go do something. And that something is take the last memory action. So Molly is going to say, got it, understood. I'll do that after I'm done with my attack and resolving all my triggers, and then I'll go ahead and take that action. Molly now resolves her trigger, which is draw 2 cards because we already discarded a card for deja vu. So Molly gets the benefit of having 2 cards in her hand at this point. Now we go and finish, she's completely done with her first action. Now we go resolve the stuff that happens with the Noxious Nephilim. Well, since Noxious Nephilim took damage, now we go through those dominoes of Memories of Blood, allowing Molly to take a damage and discard a card to take the last memory. Instead of having 2 cards in hand in order to draw 3, she only needs to have 1 card in hand. This will pay for deja vu from her melee, and that will draw her 2 cards. From there, it will be guaranteed that she'll have a card to discard when she takes the last memory action from the Noxious Nephilim. Lastly, and maybe I should have actually started with this, Molly 2 has Arcane Reservoir. We should have had a 7-card hand the entire time. This was one of the more complicated topics that I was really itching to talk about in an errata video, so I hope it made sense to you. If it didn't, feel free to jump on over to the Discord and we can discuss there. Okay, that'll do it for Molly, so let's jump into the next episode, which is the Nekima Hounds Abound video. This is currently the most popular video on my channel at the time of this recording, and we really need to address a pretty sizable misstep I made, and that's with Candy's activation. Near the end of the turn, I activated Candy and used Self-Loathing on the last Hound. Unfortunately, Self-Loathing is enemy only. So how do we fix this? Well, when approaching this problem, it really kind of stems with starting back at turn 1, activation 1. You really need to actually save a low card in your hand for an attack. The idea is that Candy has 2 attacks on her card and she can pull stunned off the opponent in order to get a bonus. Her bonus action is an attack that gives the enemy stunned. However, you want your Corrupted Hound to win that duel. So in order to do that, you want to cheat Candy as low as possible, or cheat your Corrupted Hound higher than whatever she happens to flip. What I did here is I actually re-recorded the entire video with a whole new refresh of cards and order, and you'll see that this all still works just as consistently as I promised in the first video. So let me just bring you directly to Candy's activation, since everything else pretty much plays out exactly the same. So what we're looking at here is actually kind of one of the worst case scenarios. We have the benefit of knowing we're not going to Black Joker because we already flipped through it at the beginning of the turn, but Candy flipped pretty high on a stat 6 willpower. Our willpower 3 kind of sucks. So she flipped a 9 and 6 will get you to 15. In order to get out of this, I need to cheat Candy down and the Hound up, or just cheat the Hound up. Just so happens that I still have that 13 of Crows in my hand that I kept for summoning. Since I got a free summon, this works out nicely. So this is probably the only part in this whole setup that would be prone to failure or is a little bit shaky, but to try and help yourself out, always keep a 1 in your hand when you see it, and always keep a reserve 13 just to maximize your odds. At the end of the turn, you'll still end up with some pretty low cards or few cards in your hand, unless you get really lucky and get a couple Hounds for free, which would be nice. And that happens more often than you think. So this is what I've got for you. This is how I solved that problem. And at the end of it, the board state still looks pretty similar, but you'll also notice that I had an extra thing to do with Candy, so I figured why not give fast to that Terror Tot that I summoned so it can heal off of its next turn and when it does another Grim Feast and grow up into our 4th Young Nephilim. So we'll have a 4th Young Nephilim with fast on turn 2, healed up, ready to go. And that's how I think we should solve this problem. Let me know what you think. All right, rolling into Ashes and Dust, going corner to corner. There are only a couple of things to note on this one, and the first one's pretty minor, which is Leviticus is technically move 8 at the start of the game, but he's basically going to stay where he is in the video to ensure the 6-inch pulse goes off on his Soul Harvest trigger. Now, the second one could go either way. I goofed on my towards and away rules. A couple of times in the video, I specifically and incorrectly called out that you'll stop in base contact with an object as soon as you touch it. And that is completely wrong, and here's the receipt. For the towards and away rules, you pick 2 points on both objects and you push or move, I should say, depending on what type of move it is. For this case, it's a push. We would be pushing Ashes as close to that point on the object, which would be the scrap marker, as possible. Now, this doesn't really mean anything as far as the outcome of this video, but I did make a point twice to call out incorrect rules, so I really want to take the moment to correct that here. The reason why this doesn't impact the outcome is the ability on Ashes and Dust says to push this model up to 12 inches towards the target or towards the marker. And the Mech Rider put this scrap marker down just at the end of our 12-inch range for Ashes. So no additional movement here, just because we did take the full 12-inch push, and then at the end of it, we're still at 39 inches across the board. So we're gonna take a real quick detour from the titled episodes into the curated cursory combo for Badlands hand pressure. Now there was a comment on the video that called out, hey, you can actually do this in Forgotten, and I don't know how I missed that because the Rabble Risers have Challenge and your Noxious Nephilim has Bring It. Best case scenario is there's actually a pretty cool combo here. If you have 2 Rabble Risers that are able to successfully challenge one enemy model, then if they're nearby within 4 inches of the Noxious Nephilim, ideally what you would like is Noxious Nephilim would do Bring It on that model. That model fails the duel, they come and attack the Nephilim. Nephilim takes damage, who can then proc Memories of Blood. So now your Rabble Riser can cycle a card out of your hand, get focus, then the enemy also has to discard 2 cards in order to be able to attack you. They're just kind of put in a situation where it's decision of bad or worse options. I either cheat, which gets a card out of my hand so I don't have to come in and take a swing, or I fail it, which is the worst option, and then I have to discard 2 cards. You get focused on your Rabble Riser, and you get to do it again. Not only does that set up your Rabble Risers for free focus and discards, you could also just have Molly discard as well and give out Distracted, assuming you're running Molly 1, which is the final piece of this. And once your opponent is discarding or cheating their cards, ideally they will be down at least 3 cards, so Molly can now start telling disturbing stories for 3 irreducible. It is kind of like a black hole that just really hurts if your opponent gets stuck in it. Okay, now hear me out. The next 2 episodes for Inescapable Goo Part 1 and 2 Those are episodes 5 and 6, as well as episode 7 for Sparks and Friends Blow Everything Up. I don't think I did anything wrong. So in my quest to put out the perfect rules video, I think I made it. I'm gonna give myself a pat on the back and just skip right over all of those and move right into the final one, which is episode 8, Painful Paper People. Oh, Asami. It looks like the time was fleeting, but hopefully it was fun. You got the errata from Wyrd officially, not from me, so this whole setup is no longer even viable. Flicker is no longer a thing. We're gonna have to throw a big old red canceled stamp on this one. It's no longer a thing. Wyrd took care of it for me. I had a pretty funny moment with this one actually. Right after I had uploaded this video, I attended a local tournament and my very first opponent showed up and ran this list against me. It was a lot of fun. It was not nearly as oppressive on the receiving end as I thought it would be. However, maybe I just got lucky and they wanted to go easy on me that day and not throw Jorgumos to just eliminate the whole world. So thanks, Wyrd. This one is all done. I do think the new Asami looks really cool and interesting. I got to play around with her a little bit at Gen Con 2024 this year. So hopefully maybe something cool comes out of that. I'll throw up a new video for Asami in the future. But for now, fare thee well this version of Asami. It was fun. And with that, folks, we're all done. I don't have anything left to go back and talk about, point out, or call out. I hope this was very helpful and valuable for making sure everybody gets their shenanigans done correctly. Thanks for going along on the ride with me. As always, have fun, be a good opponent. I'll see you in the next one.